Hello, and welcome to this series that's going to introduce you to some of the world's religions. I'm Dr. George Archer. As you surely noticed by now, because you're watching this video, this class is not like other classes you might have taken before. This class does not have outside readings. Instead, before each class, you're going to watch video lectures like this one. This is referred to as a flipped classroom. A flipped classroom is just another way of saying the lectures for the course, which usually happen in a classroom, and the readings for the course, which usually happen at home, are reversed. You'll have the lectures outside of the classroom in these videos, and then in the class, we're going to look at readings and other artifacts like art and music together. I'm guessing that most of you have never been in a class like this before, so allow me to explain why I do things this way and how we're going to proceed. First off, most students today are not natural readers of books. A lot of people from older generations lament that, but it's really just because technology has changed and younger people think and learn in different ways. I would bet that for most of you, most of the information you encounter on a regular basis isn't found in a printed book, but instead is on the internet in a variety of forms: text, sound, video, and images. That is the way you've probably learned most throughout your lives so far. That's the way you're used to learning. Rather than trying to fight your predisposition for digital learning over reading printed books, let's instead lean into it. If you're used to learning through multimedia on the internet, it's my job to teach you that way. So I hope by asking you to watch these videos rather than just do readings, you're going to learn in a way that comes more naturally. How do these videos work? Each video will give you an overview of materials that will be discussed in class. Watch the videos, take notes on what you see and what you hear. At the end of every video, there will be a number of questions. These questions ask you about what you just watched, about key vocabulary, historical information, and theoretical concerns. When you come to class, you must be prepared to answer the questions from the videos assigned for that day. I will call on students at random and ask them the exact same questions from the videos assigned of the day, and you will be expected to know the answers. This will be the basis of your class participation grade over the semester. If you can't answer the questions from the videos, or can't answer them well, or you just say the exact same thing the video said without using your own words, well then your participation grade will suffer, perhaps severely. I expect you to be able to answer each question in detail using full sentences and employing the vocabulary that you just learned. Plus, this is where the questions for the exams will come from. The exams in this course are built directly out of the questions built into each video, which you have in advance. There's no surprises here. I literally just take the questions from all the videos in a given unit of the course and reconstruct those questions as your exams. So, in other words, if you understand the questions from the videos, the exams are a piece of cake. If you don't understand the answer to the questions in the videos, you may not come to class unprepared. It's your job to find the answers. You can do this in a few different ways. You can rewatch the video or the relevant parts of the video. Everything you need to know is in there, I promise. Or if you still can't find it or you don't understand, you can ask me. Email me or visit me during my office hours. I won't just give you the answers, but I will nudge you in the right direction. And by the way, if you're concerned about bothering your professor, don't be. It's my job to help you. I hold regular office hours listed on the syllabus that are allotted just for you to speak to me in person. If you email me, I will also try my very best to respond as soon as possible. Also, I would strongly encourage you not to look for answers online. It's not that there isn't good information on the internet. There is. But unfortunately, for every bit of useful information, there is much, much more misinformation. And besides that, if you're confused enough to have to look something up, that probably means you don't understand the thing enough yet to spot the difference between trustworthy information and not so trustworthy information. So, if you aren't sure, rewatch, rethink, email me, or come pay me a visit. So that's it. Before you come to class, watch the videos assigned for the day and be able to answer the questions from each video. Be ready to answer these questions in class and for your exams. What's the point of doing things this way? Again, most of you are probably much more comfortable watching videos than, say, doing readings. It isn't my job as your professor to bore you, but to make you learn. If you prefer learning by watching a video or two, then we should do that. Second, this is going to free up a lot of time in the class that normally would be spent on taking notes. As you go through the videos and answer the questions, you're going to be writing down all that you need to know for class discussion and graded projects. And so when you get to class, you should already have plenty of notes and vocabulary to work off of. And if you missed something, you can rewatch a video in a way that you can't rewatch a live lecture, and you're probably not likely to redo your readings. Third, you don't need me to physically stand in front of you to give you a lecture, so why waste time in class on that? Instead, we'll use the class time together doing things that require a live instructor and could also use your fellow students. That is, things that require you to think, consider, make mistakes, and ask questions. Before we begin our journey through the world's religions, we need to ask ourselves two questions. What is religious studies? And what is religion? Here we're going to work on that former question, what is religious studies? The other question, what is religion, will be discussed in the next video. At first it seems easy enough. Religious studies is the study of religion. That's true. But it's also a little bit more complicated. There are lots of ways of studying religion, and only a small number of them can truly be called religious studies. For instance, you could go to a Bible camp, or a Hebrew school, or a Quran class, and spend all day for years learning about a certain religion, but none of these are religious studies. These are theology, not religious studies. So what's the difference between the two? Since most people are more familiar with theology than religious studies, let's start with theology. So here's 4 things you need to know about what theology is. Theology is a prescriptive study of a religion. That means theology is trying to correct something about one's religion. What is your religion supposed to be? What do I have to think, know, believe, experience, or do to be a good member of a certain religion? Theology asks how one is to, say, be a good Christian, or how to be a Christian correctly. Or if the student is already a Christian, how can they become a better Christian? Theology prescribes. It wants to change something about the student's religion. Number 2, theology is a moral study of religion. There's a conscious moral component to theology. A theologian or anyone else asks, how can I be a better Muslim? Or what should a Muslim do in a certain situation? Theology is making moral choices, and it's aware that it's making moral choices. Number 3, theology makes truth claims. Theology makes some kinds of claims about ultimate reality, not just particular historical events or people, but reality itself at all times and all places. Jesus loves you. God wanted that to happen. There is no God. Buddhism is the truth. The Jews are the chosen people. Statements like these are claims about the ultimate. They claim to be correct universally and without exception. These things cannot be affirmed or denied in any typical sense of debate or argument. Yet, claims like these must be affirmed in order to practice theology. And number 4, theology is exclusive, meaning that you need to be a member of a certain religious group to do its theology. Jews can't do Christian theology, and Christians can't do Muslim theology, and so on. Theology is the study of a religion in which the religious actors are studying themselves and addressing people who are more or less like they are. So to recap, theology is a study of religion that is prescriptive, that is how religion is supposed to be, moral, how a believer or a religion could be better. It makes truth claims, that is, what is the nature of reality itself at all times, and it's exclusive. It can only be pursued by members of a given community. If you've ever studied religion on your own, or in a class from outside of a university, or from the media, or from your family, you are almost certainly doing theology, not religious studies. Religious studies, on the other hand, is a bit different from theology. First, religious studies describes but never prescribes. Unlike theology, religious studies doesn't seek to change anything about the religion or religions it studies. Religious studies can give you the history of a religious movement or an idea, or different ways to interpret a religious text or religious art, but it doesn't correct anyone's beliefs or behaviors. Religious studies should not be and cannot be prescriptive. A theologian might ask what Christianity is supposed to be, but a religious studies scholar would only ask what Christianity is or already has been. For example, in the Middle Ages, several groups of Western Christians went on crusades where they tried to invade different parts of the Middle East, and they claimed, at least in part, that they were invading these lands because of their understandings of Christianity. Now, if you're doing theology, you can ask yourself if going to war like this and killing lots of innocent people is a good reading of Christianity or not. Theologians then and now have discussed whether or not one ought to act this way as a Christian. But religious studies doesn't do that. For the religious studies scholar, that question is irrelevant. The Crusades happened, and various people who called themselves Christians claimed to have done certain things because of their Christianity. Does that make it a correct reading of Christianity? Is this a bad interpretation of Christianity? Well, those are theological questions, not religious studies ones. The scholar of religious studies would instead ask why these people did this, how would these people explain themselves, their thoughts, and their behaviors. Whether or not this is a good understanding of Christianity is inconsequential to the scholar of religious studies. Religious studies is morally indifferent. Religious studies does not weigh in on the rightness or wrongness of anything it investigates. Whether someone is a good Hindu or a bad Buddhist is entirely irrelevant. A religious studies scholar does not label anyone right or wrong. A religious studies scholar doesn't pass judgment on their object of study, even if it is indeed deeply opposed to their personal stances on the same issues. A scholar of religious studies analyzes belief systems and practices which may well be radically at odds with their own, and they will not pass judgment. A scholar of religious studies may study things like incest, human sacrifice, ritual genital mutilation, terrorism, fascism, or cannibalism, and still they will not pass judgment. Theology is in the business of morality. A theologian has to ask about the morality of their religion. But religious studies is morally detached. This is what we know about religion or religions, whether or not we approve of it. Religious studies makes demonstrable claims only. A scholar of religious studies should not be making claims about ultimate reality, only what people say about ultimate reality. A Muslim theologian might claim that the Prophet Muhammad was sent on a mission by God. But the religious studies scholar can't confirm or deny that that is true. Sure, the religious studies scholar can correctly say that Muslims universally claim that Muhammad comes with news from the deity, but they can't argue for or against the truth of that kind of claim. Frankly, the scholar of religion can't do much involving the reality of gods and miracles, only report that certain people believe in them. Whether a certain god the scholar is studying materially exists or not doesn't matter. The religious studies scholar doesn't ask if God is good, But instead, if someone says that that God is good, or if someone says that that God loves people, or someone says that that God has the head of an elephant and rides a mouse. What matters to the religious studies scholar is what a certain person or group of people think, not what is ultimately real. The only claims about reality the religious studies scholar has to work with are historical claims that can be measured in some material way. So, the religious studies scholar doesn't ask, what does Christianity say, as if Christianity is a thing that exists outside of human beings. Instead, we ask, what does this certain Christian or Christian artifact say? In that sense, religious studies aims to be a scientific study of religion. That's actually what the discipline is usually called in most other languages. In many languages, religious studies is literally just the science of religion, based off the French science de religion. In German, we say Religionswissenschaft, that is, the Wissenschaft, the systematic impersonal study of religion. So when we say religious studies in English, think of studying religion like a scientist. Just facts that we can demonstrate to each other, not our opinions, our beliefs, or claims about otherwise unseen truths. Religious studies is inclusive. Anyone can employ religious studies, regardless of their particular religious identity. A Muslim cannot be a Christian theologian, but a Muslim can do religious studies on Christianity. A religious studies scholar can be the member of any religion or none at all, because, like with any science, someone's personal belief systems shouldn't really matter. A good rule, by the way, if you want to know if a certain author or speaker is being a theologian or a religious studies scholar, if you can tell what religion the scholar personally agrees or disagrees with, then that scholar is being a theologian. If you see someone on TV being interviewed, and you can tell what religion that person who's speaking is, that's theology, not religious studies. My personal religious background is not important to religious studies, and neither is yours. So, roughly, that is the academic field called religious studies. The study of religion or religions that is only descriptive, never prescriptive, morally neutral, fact-oriented and historical, and open to all. This is compared to theology, which is often prescriptive, morally guided, speaks on behalf of universal truth claims, and is only practiced by members of a certain group. We aren't doing theology here, but that doesn't necessarily mean there's anything wrong with theology either. In fact, it would be rather tricky to get through life without thinking theologically sometimes. There's nothing innately right or wrong about being prescriptive or having moral concerns or looking to understand the ultimate or speaking on behalf of a community of which you yourself are a member. We all do that sort of thing all the time. We all practice theology, even if we're not being religious. So, in short, just because we're going to be leaving theology outside of our classroom, that doesn't mean that we're condemning it. If you're a Muslim or a Buddhist or a Christian or a Sikh or an atheist or anything else, great. But it doesn't matter in this class. But aren't religious studies and theology saying the same thing? Well, in a way, and the two ways of studying religion aren't unrelated, but the methods they're using are very different, and they serve very different purposes. An analogy might help. In most modern academic settings, people study art. Sometimes we have studio art classes, like painting. This is where one learns how to be an artist or how to be a better artist. Is this technique good or bad? Does this combination of colors look better this way? What do you, the artist, wish to express? Now, there are also other kinds of art classes called art history. In art history, you aren't making art, you're just observing it. The art historian doesn't say, how can this painting be better, or do you like this painting? Instead, the student of art history stands outside of the artist studio and peers in. So the painting class and the art history class are both art classes, but they are quite different. They are both studies of art, but the painting class is prescriptive. For instance, how am I supposed to paint this? Morally driven, what is the best way to paint this? It tries to express truth, that is, what is the reality of this thing I'm painting? and it's practiced by the student themselves. Meanwhile, an art historian is just being descriptive, morally detached, historical, and it doesn't really matter if the art historian happens to be an artist themselves. Theology and religious studies have a similar relationship. Theology is like the painting class, where one tries to develop certain religious skills or discover what the best way to be religious is. Religious studies, on the other hand, is like the art history class, where we ask what trends are observable in religious phenomena. Like the painting class and art history class, theology and religious studies are clearly connected, but they are distinct too. There isn't just one kind of material science. There's biology and chemistry, physics, and so on. And there's lots of subdisciplines within those, like molecular biology, cellular biology, and evolutionary biology. The disciplines and subdisciplines here overlap, and sometimes they fight for dominance, but generally, all these sciences share subject matters and basic assumptions. Religious studies is no different. It's just a science that studies a human phenomenon. And so religious studies has lots of methodologies and subdisciplines and approaches, which differ but also overlap and sometimes work together and other times butt heads and fight. So what follows is just a brief history of some of the major trends in religious studies. Of course, this is just a small selection to give you an idea of where religious studies came from and where it can go. You'll notice that some of the following methods of studying religion disagree, while others can be used in harmony with each other for mutual benefit. In 1859, Charles Darwin published his famous book On the Origin of the Species by Means of Natural Selection. The foundational assumption of this study was that if you want to understand something properly, you need to know where it came from. In Darwin's case, if you want to understand an organism, you need to know what that organism developed from, its biological evolution. Following Darwin, people started asking that question about other areas of study too. Not just how did a biological organism evolve, but how did everything evolve from something older? Even things like thoughts and worldviews, cultures and morals. Where did these human phenomena, in this case religion, where did they evolve from? Victorian-era scholars like Edward B. Taylor looked at human society and their religions as long chains of developments. Tyler would start by looking at the religion of societies that he called primitive, and asked how they evolved into societies that he considered to be civilized. Tyler claimed that so-called primitive societies in the past believed in animism. In his book, Primitive Culture, Tyler says that animism is the general doctrine of souls and other spiritual beings. That is to say, there is a generic and undefined belief in primitive cultures in the continued existence of dead people in the form of spirits, as well as non-material agents that act on or around living people. Ancient people would have experiences that they didn't understand, like, let's say, dreams or hallucinations, and they would falsely attribute those experiences to external forces, like souls, ghosts, spirits, or gods. Taylor argued that this animism, literally soulism, is the root of all religion. In time, as cultures evolved, these animistic beliefs in unseen things evolved alongside their various societies and cultures, culminating in the so-called civilized religion of the modern West. That is, the culture to which Tyler himself was coincidentally a member. His younger contemporary was James George Frazer. Frazer also held an evolutionary interpretation of religion. In his massive multi-volume book, The Golden Bough, Frazer said that the oldest societies believed in magic. Magic is the attempt of a person to manipulate natural forces through supernatural means. Say by casting a spell, or reciting an enchantment, or carrying a talisman, or performing a ritual. This magical way of thinking, Frazer argued, evolved slowly into the phenomena that we now call religion. Now, it isn't just a certain person trying to manipulate the world by performing magic, but rather it's the attempt of an entire society to manipulate the universe, or the spirits, or the gods. Spells evolved into prayers, ghosts evolved into gods, and chants evolved into sacred texts. And Fraser would argue that this evolution is ongoing. Now we have an even more effective way of manipulating the world around us called science. And science is starting to replace its own ancestor, religion. And so again, notice that like Taylor, Fraser concludes that his own scientific culture was the most evolved. We can rightly ask how scientific and non-biased these men were being. It's probably not a fluke that both Tyler and Fraser ended up concluding that their own culture was the most evolved. But that doesn't mean we have to throw away evolutionary thinking either. Sometimes, knowing what a religious phenomenon developed from in the past can help us understand it in the present. Consider in modern cultures when someone sneezes. It's often considered polite to respond to someone else's sneeze by saying, "Bless you," "God bless you," or wishing for someone's health, as in "Salut" or "Gesundheit." Why do we do this? Well, there's a number of theories as to why. Often people claim that there was a plague somewhere in the ancient world at some point, and that sneezing was seen as an early symptom of that disease. So people would bless each other or wish for each other's health because they were concerned that the one doing the sneezing was about to get the plague. And while we can't pinpoint exactly when this little sneezing ritual began, we can be pretty sure it was probably something like this. People were really terrified of a deadly disease, rightly so, and so they started blessing each other's health if someone sneezed. Fear of the plague led to a little blessing ritual, which in turn led into our modern customs. That is, that custom evolved. But then again, we can ask how much evolutionary thinking is actually helping us here. A phenomenon is not the same as its point of origin. Even biologically, evolution creates random and sometimes unnecessary adaptations. So, if today you sneeze and someone says "bless you" in some way, does our knowledge of ancient plagues explain what's going on now? Does the person saying "bless you" today even know about this ancient reference to the plague? Does it matter? Not really. So, evolutionary thinking about religion is certainly informative, but it might also equate every religious phenomenon to its own history. Just because medieval Northern Europeans decorated trees in the wintertime, that doesn't necessarily mean anything at all about what a modern Christian is doing when they set up a plastic Christmas tree. Around the same time that Taylor and Fraser were writing, others were using sociology to investigate religion. Sociology is the study of humans through the lenses of their societies. Not just what does a person do, but what does a person do with other people? Humans everywhere live in societies of some kind, so maybe rather than just studying individual people, we should study religions as societies acting collectively. For a sociologist, religion is an expression of a society and not just the beliefs or actions of one single person. The most famous of these early sociologists of religion is Emil Durkheim. Durkheim argued that all ancient peoples divided the world into the profane and the sacred. The profane was the normal stuff of life, the materials all around us, whereas the sacred is things that are considered to be the source of meaning and power. Some things in any given society are called sacred or holy, and most other things are not. They are profane. A certain society would be composed of normal material people, and therefore the society is profane. However, these people would create a communal mental projection of themselves in the sacred as an image, like a sacred plant or a spirit animal or a holy object of some kind, and then they would worship it. This is a totem, from the Ojibwe term for the expression of one's heart. A totem is the symbol of a certain community's beliefs and values, the things that tied them together as a group. The sacred totem was to be guarded, honored, and treated as a taboo, because, in truth, the totem is a sign of the society itself. A totem, Durkheim argued, is a symbolic way for a group of people to think about themselves and each other. Over time, people would forget that the totem referred to the people who actually made the totem, and they would just start to worship it as it was, or think of the totem as an abstraction like a god or a natural power. That is, Durkheim would conclude that the practice of totemism would evolve into religions as we understand them today. Perhaps the tendency to project oneself and one's group into a series of symbols could be explained in other ways, too. Like how Durkheim conceived of a universal human experience of the sacred, Rudolf Otto thought that everyone, everywhere, had personal experiences of what he called the numinous. In his book, The Idea of the Holy, Otto said that there was a non-rational thought in all people, which was the feeling of the numinous. The numinous is a feeling that there's something about life that can't be addressed, explained, or even really sensed by our minds. It's the kind of thing you feel when you experience birth or death, or encounter a natural disaster, or gaze into the stars at night. We are aware of this feeling of the numinous. We know there's something mysterious and fascinating and powerful about this world and our lives, even though we can't put our finger on exactly what that is. This awareness that there's something that we're unaware of, let's say perhaps the awareness of mystery, is, as Otto claimed, expressed in various ways as religion. Religions are just how the world's peoples explain life's mysteries and wonders. And sure enough, when the big questions in life come up, discussions of religion are usually sure to follow. Notice here, though, that unlike Taylor, Fraser, and Durkheim, Rudolf Otto is not talking about evolution. This is an ancient but ongoing process without direction. We still sense the numinous in life's best and worst moments, and therefore we're still creating explanations of that feeling in religions right now, today. Another sociological rejection of evolutionary thinking can be seen in Bronislaw Malinowski. Malinowski also argued that there were universal feelings that all humans have, but instead of the numinous, Malinowski concluded that all religions boil down to trauma and relief from that trauma. All humans, but especially those in pre-modern societies, live with ever-present fears of danger, sickness, and death. In order to deal with this inescapable stress, people developed rituals, stories, beliefs, and customs which could help them cope. And in fact, they still do this. Again, this isn't evolutionary thinking anymore, but rather just a state of how the human animal itself always works. Humans get scared of things and will create a kind of psychic response called religion. People everywhere and at all times are dealing with various kinds of trauma, fear, and despair, and therefore they settle them in the form of religions which supposedly comfort them. Psychologists and psychoanalysts have also been interested in the study of religion. Psychologists would argue that the human brain does much more than you'd think. Our brain is that voice in our heads, sure, but it's also a lot of things that we're not consciously aware of. We don't have to consciously think to make our heart beat, or make ourselves breathe, or to have a dream. Our brain just does that on its own. That means that is our subconscious. That's our brain doing a lot of things that we don't make it do, and so we don't even usually notice that it's doing them. Sigmund Freud wrote a number of works on religious studies, such as Totem and Taboo, The Future of an Illusion, and Moses and Monotheism. As a psychologist and psychoanalyst, Freud saw religion as a projection of both conscious and unconscious forces at play in the human psyche. Freud said that within the human mind were hidden fears and unfulfilled sexual desires, which for societal reasons we ignore or suppress. For instance, experiences of violence or horror could not be aired out expressly, and so humans developed various symbolic forms with which we try to cope with our pains and wants. Religions are sort of like play acting of thoughts and needs in our mind that we are otherwise unwilling or unable to deal with directly. That is, religion is responding to our subconscious. So, for instance, people who did not have a positive experience of a loving father in their childhoods could project that pain onto a religious belief in an all-powerful Father God who would always love his children. In this case, the study of religion for the psychologist is less like studying someone's conscious thoughts, but more like studying their dreams and nightmares. Freud's younger friend and devotee, Carl Jung, took the psychological approach to religious studies even further. Jung said that the human body and mind is more or less the same for everyone all the time. No matter where or when we're from, we all collectively have more or less the same bodily forms, the same central nervous systems, and the same biochemistry. And so, Jung would argue, humans have a collective unconscious. Again, like with Freud, the unconscious mind regulates our bodies and sometimes sends us strange, non-rational thoughts. But Jung would say that a big part of the subconscious mind is the same for everyone, everywhere. If all humans who have ever lived and ever will live need to eat, for example, it stands to reason that all humans will develop a similar subconscious thought about eating. They just won't know they're doing this because it's all subconscious. So if a Jewish person in Canada says a prayer before a meal, and a Pacific Islander on the other side of the world 1,000 years ago thanked a plant for its produce, it's because both of those people have a shared collective unconscious. They both have common elements in their ways of thinking, even though they have no access to each other or each other's cultures. They're just all people, and all people's brains think about food sometimes. While psychologies, sociologies, and anthropologies of religion are influential, they aren't without their problems too. The major critique of this way of approaching religion is that they're reductive. They take something very big and complicated and multifaceted and oversimplify it into something else. So religion is really about societal bonds, or religion is really about evolution, or religion is really about psychological neuroses, or religion is really about people being scared of the boogeyman. While any one of these might be true and correct, the problem with reductivism is that it's naive when it comes to complex phenomena. To be reductive is to simplify things a bit too much. Sure, religions can be about societies or fear or magic or subconscious stress, but is that all religion is? Does that explain all religion? Reducing something like this warps your data set in order to make it easier to work with and understand. But therefore, it isn't always historically accurate. Reductivism is sort of making things a little too easy. So for instance, back to Freud. There are certainly some people who have had negative experiences with their fathers growing up. And there are also clearly some religious people who believe in supernatural father figures. Most Christians, a fair number of Hindus, pagans of various sorts, and North American indigenous religions all have some kind of divine father or fathers. Did all the members of all these groups have bad human fathers? No. Did everyone who ever lived who had a deadbeat dad project it onto their religious beliefs? No. While it's certainly possible that there are people who had bad fathers and so projected it onto their religions as good supernatural father beings, there's no real way to prove this happened most of the time or even that often. What Freud has therefore done is reduced something very complicated, the billions of people who have some kind of belief in a supernatural father or fathers, and he reduced it into a singular, familiar thought that's much easier to wrap your head around, that some people have terrible dads. A reductive claim boils down the data so much that it falls in on itself. Do some people with bad fathers create for themselves father gods? Probably, but there's no scientific way to study such a phenomenon outside of a few individual cases of living people who can somehow be questioned by a psychoanalyst. While we could possibly prove that there are some instances of correlation between bad dads and father gods in a few observable cases, we couldn't jump to the much bigger claim that this is how all religions with father gods work in all situations. The problem with reductive thinking like this is that it decontextualizes. It imagines the object of study in an artificial way, outside of historical context. Throughout time, people have had many languages, cultures, and thoughts, an endless variety of historical contexts in which people live. And then there are individual contexts in which certain people's personal histories, experiences, identities, and psychological traits make a difference to them too. So if we want to study religion, we have to account for all these elements of context: dialects and economy, culture and history, politics, location, self-identification, and any number of other factors. This turn to contextualization manifested itself most powerfully following the postmodern turn, roughly beginning in the second half of the 20th century. Postmodernism is a sticky term, and we'll define it more as we get later into this course, but for now, consider postmodernism the use of contextual thinking. So, for instance, if you want to ask how does your language affect your religion, you can ask a philologist who studies religious studies. Or how does gender or gender relations play into a religious ritual? Well, then you turn to feminist studies of religion. That is, when we study religion, how does the context of gender or language on the religious phenomena affect what we're studying? Or if you want to talk about how economics affects religious phenomena, or race, or place, or sexuality, or any other factor which comprises the context of a certain person's life and religion. The list of possible lenses through which we can study religion is quite long, so instead of just trying to find the one right way to study religion, let's play with lots of ways. Rather than just have one tool that we can use every single time, let's get a whole toolbox full of methods for studying religion. Religion is a complicated topic, and so our ways of studying it, religious studies, should probably be complicated too. Here's some things to think about before you come to class. Take your notes from this video and answer these questions in your own words and using your own thoughts. What is religious studies? Describe 4 differences between theology and religious studies. Who are some major anthropologists of religion and how did they study it? What is evolutionary thinking and animism? Discuss the notable sociologists of religious studies and their approaches. Be sure to define totem and the numinous. Describe some important psychologists of religious studies. How do they describe the subconscious? What does it mean to be reductive?